In a room where the very walls seemed to breathe with the weight of centuries, the air was thick with anticipation. The table was long, the chairs filled by faces that had seen history unfold from the inside, but today, every eye was fixed on one man. King Charles stood at the head, his hands resting lightly on a stack of papers that no one else had been permitted to see. This was no ordinary gathering. It had been called at short notice, without the usual formalities or explanations, and the absence of one person was louder than any spoken word. Camilla was nowhere to be seen. Whispers had circulated from the moment the summons arrived, each theory darker than the last. Catherine sat to the king's right, her posture perfect, yet her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She knew, even before the first word was spoken, that something irreversible was about to happen. William's gaze shifted between his wife and his father, trying to read the unspoken language in the room. The silence stretched like a rope pulled taut, until finally, Charles began to speak. His voice was steady, deliberate, the kind of tone a man uses when he has already made peace with a decision others will fight to accept. There was no theatricality, no raised voice, yet every syllable carried the weight of a seismic shift. He spoke of duty, of legacy, of the sacred responsibility to protect the stability of the crown, and then, in a single sentence, he detonated the bombshell. Camilla was to be removed from the royal line. The words fell, like lead, into the stillness, and for a moment, no one moved. It was as if the very air had been punched from the room. Some shifted in their seats, others avoided eye contact altogether, but the shock was unanimous. For Catherine, it was not victory she felt in that instant. It was a flood of emotions so complex they threatened to overwhelm her. She had long understood the fractures running beneath the surface of the monarchy, the subtle power plays and whispered betrayals. But to hear it confirmed, to know the course had been set in such a public way, was something else entirely. She blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, glistening at the corners of her eyes. Not because she pitied Camilla, and not because she relished the outcome, but because she could see, more clearly than anyone, what would follow. This was not just the removal of a title. It was the start of a storm that would tear through the palace, through the family, through the monarchy itself. Charles did not waver under the weight of their reactions. He spoke of the need for unity, of moving forward. But behind his measured words was the unmistakable tremor of a man who understood the cost of what he had done. Around the table, faces betrayed a mix of disbelief, relief, and quiet dread. Every person knew this was a decision that could not be undone, and one that would be remembered as a turning point in royal history. As the meeting adjourned, no one dared speak above a whisper. Catherine rose slowly, her eyes lowered, each step heavy with the knowledge that nothing in the palace would ever feel safe again. She knew the conversations that would follow in private rooms, the accusations, the leaks to the press, the careful crafting of public statements to explain the unexplainable. But the roots of this decision stretched far beyond this moment, into years of power struggles, betrayal, and a monarchy fighting to survive its own secrets. This was not a decision made overnight. For years, whispers had circled through the palace, like a draft that no one could quite block, murmurs of a quiet yet relentless struggle for influence. It was a war without official declaration, fought not on the grand stage of state occasions, but in the shadowed corridors, during private dinners, and through subtle gestures only the sharpest eyes could read. On the surface, Catherine and Camilla smiled for the cameras, exchanged polite words at public engagements, and fulfilled their roles with grace. But behind those carefully crafted images lay a rivalry as old as the monarchy itself, one rooted in competing visions for the crown's future. Catherine represented youth, renewal, and the promise of a monarchy attuned to the modern world. Camilla embodied the weight of tradition, the unspoken debts of history, and a connection to Charles that no outsider could rival. The tension between them was not simply personal, it was strategic. Both women understood that influence in the palace was a currency far more valuable than any title, and every decision from who stood where, on the balcony to which charities were endorsed, became another silent move in their ongoing chess match. Charles, caught between the two most influential women in his life, struggled to maintain balance. He tried to keep peace, offering each reassurance that her role was secure. Yet his reassurances carried less conviction with each passing year. He knew the institution could not afford open division, but the cracks were widening, There were moments when Camilla's confidence spilled over into what many saw as overreach, intervening in matters traditionally left to the heir's household, inserting herself into events meant to highlight William and Catherine's growing prominence, even reshaping certain traditions to reflect her own tastes. These moments, small in isolation, began to accumulate like stones in a wall, building distrust between her and the younger couple. Within the palace's private offices, senior courtiers were quietly choosing sides. Some, loyal to the king's wife, saw her influence as stabilizing, a continuation of Charles's own vision. Others, reading the public mood, saw in Catherine the future of a monarchy that could survive generational shifts. Their lobbying was discreet but effective, shaping which stories reached the king's ears and which fell into silence. The political maneuvering was constant, invisible to the public, but deeply felt within the palace hierarchy. William tried to serve as the bridge, urging patience from Catherine and restraint from Camilla, but the strain began to show. He was torn between loyalty to his father's wife and the instinct to protect his own family's standing. Over time, his mediating softened into subtle alignment with Catherine's view, a shift Charles could sense but not fully confront. And so, the quiet war continued, each side gaining and losing ground, neither willing to yield. But what triggered Charles to finally act wasn't merely politics. It was a deeply personal betrayal that could no longer be ignored. It began with a single conversation overheard, reported, and impossible to deny, one that would set in motion a chain of events the monarchy could never reverse. The words were not spoken in the grand halls of the palace, nor in a formal setting, but in the supposed safety of a private gathering. Yet nothing in the royal world is ever truly private. Camilla's voice, tinged with a biting edge, carried remarks that went far beyond idle gossip. She allegedly questioned the temperament and suitability of William and Catherine's children, painting them in tones that suggested weakness and unworthiness for the roles destiny had assigned them. It was not merely unkind, it was a challenge to the very lineage the monarchy depended on. These words might have died in the air had they not found ears eager to deliver them where they would cause the greatest damage. A trusted confidant, one whose loyalty to Charles was beyond question, relayed the account in full. No embellishment, no hesitation, just the raw, unsettling truth. For Charles, hearing this was like feeling a cold knife twist deep within. He could dismiss political maneuvering, even public criticism, but a personal attack on his grandchildren from his own wife was a wound that would not heal easily. When Catherine learned of the comments, she did not erupt into public indignation. Instead, she retreated into a private confrontation with William, her voice measured but trembling. She needed to know if he had heard the same thing, if he could believe that such words might have been spoken by the woman who shared his father's life. William, caught between the instinct to protect his wife and the dread of confirming her fears, could offer no comfort. He had not heard it himself, but he knew enough of palace undercurrents to suspect the report was true. The tension seeped into every private dinner Charles and Camilla shared. At first, the king tried to approach the matter gently, probing without accusation. Camilla denied any malicious intent, suggesting her words had been twisted or taken out of context. But each explanation rang hollow, her tone more defensive than conciliatory. The more she tried to dismiss the claims, the more Charles felt the space widening between them, a chasm lined with distrust. In the days that followed, Charles sought a resolution quietly, hoping the matter could fade without public consequence. But then came the event that removed all doubt. At a high-profile gathering, Camilla's demeanor betrayed something more than discomfort. It radiated defiance. A subtle comment to a foreign dignitary, laced with the same undercurrent of disdain that had first been whispered in private, was enough to make those who knew the backstory exchange loaded glances. The moment confirmed what Charles feared. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. From that moment, Charles knew the monarchy's stability could not survive without decisive action, and it would come in the form of rewriting the royal line itself. Removing a queen from the royal line isn't just unprecedented, it's dangerous. It is the kind of move that, if miscalculated, could send shockwaves through the monarchy so severe that its foundations might never recover. Charles understood this better than anyone. The decision, once made, had to be executed with precision. Every step would require careful planning, every word vetted, and every potential threat neutralized before the world even caught a hint of what was coming. And so, behind the polished facade of royal duties, a secret strategy began to take shape. The first step was consultation, not with courtiers who could be swayed by sentiment, but with the most trusted legal minds who had long served the crown. Charles needed to know if there was a legitimate path within the labyrinth of royal protocol to remove his wife's place in the line without sparking a constitutional crisis. These meetings were held in absolute secrecy, layered with coded messages and untraceable communications. The answers came back cautiously. It could be done, but only under the guise of preserving the monarchy's stability. Any public perception that this was a personal vendetta would destroy the effort before it began. Charles knew he could not do this alone. Quietly, he turned to those he trusted most: his son, William, and his sister, Princess Anne. Both had their own reasons for supporting the move. William, as the future king, needed a monarchy unburdened by scandals and divisions. Anne, ever loyal to the institution above all else, saw the danger of leaving unresolved tensions to fester. In whispered conversations and coded exchanges, the three formed an unspoken pact. They would present a united front when the moment came, even if it meant bearing the wrath of those they once considered family. Catherine, though a central figure in the conflict, initially resisted becoming visibly involved. She feared being painted as the instigator, a role the press would seize upon with glee. For her, the protection of her children and the integrity of William's reign outweighed personal satisfaction. She agreed to remain on the periphery of the visible action, allowing Charles and Anne to be the ones seen steering the decision. But her influence was unmistakable, woven into the subtleties of the plan through quiet counsel to her husband. The risks were staggering. One leak to the press could ignite a public backlash that would spiral out of control. Allies could turn overnight, and international opinion could shift sharply against the monarchy. The strategy had to be airtight. They chose a date far enough in the future to allow all legal and ceremonial preparations to be made, but soon enough to ensure the situation didn't unravel on its own. The method of delivery was debated endlessly, as a public statement versus a formal decree, or perhaps a staged announcement within the context of a broader modernization initiative to mask the true intention. Every piece was being set into place, each move deliberate and cautious. But even the most carefully planned coup can't control the human heart, and the fallout would test every fragile relationship within the palace walls. When the decision was finally made, Catherine should have felt vindicated. This was, after all, the outcome so many in the palace had quietly worked toward, the resolution to years of tension and whispered discontent. But as the days counted down toward the announcement, the sense of triumph she thought might come never arrived. Instead, a heavy, unshakable weight settled over her. A realization that this was not simply a matter of protocol or politics, but a personal reckoning that would leave deep and lasting scars. She found herself staring at the ceiling in the early hours of the morning, night after night, unable to escape the what-ifs that clawed at her mind. Each sleepless night seemed to stretch longer than the last, the quiet darkness filled with the echoes of everything this decision would set in motion. Her emotions were tangled in a knot she could not undo. On one side was the belief that the monarchy would be stronger, more united, without Camilla's divisive presence in the royal line. On the other side was compassion, a human understanding of what it meant to have one's place stripped away so publicly, to be written out of history in real time. Catherine knew what Camilla had done, the lines she had crossed, the damage she had caused. Yet the thought of watching another woman endure such a public humiliation stirred a deep ache in her. That ache was joined by a more insidious fear, the possibility that this very decision could come back to haunt William's reign. She worried that decades from now, people might see it not as a necessary act of preservation, but as a ruthless purge. Catherine had always understood that the monarchy's future rested on perception as much as principle, and in removing Camilla, they risked creating an image of a royal family willing to turn on its own. The thought of William inheriting a throne tainted by whispers of cold-blooded politics made her stomach twist. In search of clarity, she turned to the one person whose counsel had always been steady, her mother, Carol Middleton. Their conversations were long and emotional, Carol urging her daughter to trust her instincts, to remember that leadership was never free from criticism. But even her mother's reassurance could not quiet the relentless thoughts. Catherine felt trapped between doing what she believed was right for the crown and carrying the guilt of knowing it would forever alter lives. The strain began to take its toll. Friends and aides noticed her pale complexion, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, during public engagements. Behind the carefully applied veneer of grace, exhaustion gnawed at her. She withdrew more in private moments, conserving her energy for the duties she could not avoid. But nothing drained her more than the thought of what would come after the moment she would have to look Camilla in the eye, knowing there was no undoing what had been set in motion. The idea of facing that grief, that anger, that sense of betrayal, brought tears she could no longer hold back. And while Catherine wrestled with her conscience, Camilla was preparing her own counterstrike. If they thought Camilla would leave quietly, they underestimated her completely. The moment the decision was conveyed to her behind closed doors, she dismissed it outright, not as a matter of disbelief, but as a refusal to grant it legitimacy. In her mind, this was not an irreversible decree. It was a challenge, and she had no intention of conceding defeat. She saw the move as a calculated attack, orchestrated by those who had waited years to diminish her influence, and she was determined to meet it with the kind of resistance that would make them think twice about crossing her again. Her first step was to summon her own network, a tight circle of allies in both the media and the aristocracy. These were individuals whose loyalty she had cultivated over decades, people who owed her favors, or who shared her disdain for the younger royal generation's vision of modernization. Quiet calls were made, meetings were arranged away from prying eyes, and a narrative began to form. That this decision was not about preserving the monarchy, but about consolidating power in the hands of a select few. It was a dangerous storyline, one that could erode public trust if it gained traction, and Camilla knew exactly which sympathetic journalists would be willing to plant the seeds. Behind the scenes, her strategy turned sharper. She began hinting, in guarded but deliberate conversations, that she possessed knowledge that could damage reputations far more than any headline about her own removal. Old scandals, private conversations, family disagreements, nothing was off the table. The message was clear. If they stripped her from the royal line, she could strip away the carefully polished image of others. She wielded her children and grandchildren as both shield and weapon, framing the decision as an attack on them as much as on her, knowing that personalizing the fallout could generate public sympathy. Still, she knew she needed to confront the king directly. Demanding an audience with Charles was risky, but she wasn't willing to be sidelined into irrelevance without making her case. When the meeting finally took place, it was anything but conciliatory. Camilla argued with the conviction of someone who believed she was defending not just herself, but her rightful place in history. She accused unnamed forces within the family of poisoning his mind, of manipulating his sense of duty to serve their own ambitions. Charles, though visibly affected, did not reverse course. The walls between them, once built from shared history, now stood fortified by mistrust. But perhaps the most volatile moment came in a private exchange between Camilla and Catherine. What began as a restrained discussion quickly devolved into sharp words, each woman speaking not only from personal grievance, but from the weight of everything they represented in the royal hierarchy. Camilla's warning was unambiguous. If Catherine thought she had won, she should be prepared for the war that would follow. Catherine, though shaken, did not retreat. The lines between them were now etched in stone. But the machine of monarchy was already in motion, and nothing, not even Camilla's fury, could stop what came next. When the announcement hit the public, it wasn't just news, it was an earthquake. Within minutes, headlines exploded across the globe, each one more dramatic than the last. Queen, removed from royal line, blared from television screens, while social media became a frenzy of disbelief, anger, and celebration. News anchors spoke in urgent tones, commentators scrambled to explain the implications, and every photo of the royal family was suddenly dissected for hidden clues. The story wasn't just dominating the news cycle, it was the news cycle, eclipsing politics, economics, and even international crises. The monarchy had crossed a line few thought it ever would, and the aftershocks were already being felt far beyond the palace gates. Public reaction was as divided as it was intense. In some circles, there was jubilation, a sense that long-standing tensions had finally been resolved in favor of the younger generation. Supporters of William and Catherine praised the move as a necessary act of renewal, hailing Charles for making a decision they claimed would secure the monarchy's future. But in others, outrage boiled over. Loyalists to Camilla decried the act as cruel and unnecessary, accusing the palace of bowing to public pressure and undermining the sanctity of marriage. Online forums, radio call-ins, and street interviews painted a picture of a nation torn between admiration and condemnation. each side convinced they were witnessing either the monarchy's salvation or its betrayal. Inside the palace, the royal press office went into overdrive. Every sentence in the official statement was weighed and reweighed. Every public-facing remark rehearsed to the last syllable. Leaks were clamped down on with unprecedented urgency, and trusted spokespeople were deployed to control the narrative before it spiraled. Yet, no matter how carefully the message was managed, speculation thrived. Rumors spread like wildfire, stories of shouting matches, of ultimatums behind closed doors, of hidden scandals waiting to surface. The palace could shape the words, but it could not control the whispers. Against this backdrop, Catherine stepped into the public eye for the first time since the announcement. Her appearance was a deliberate attempt to project calm and continuity, but the strain was unmistakable. The smile was there, but softer, more fragile, as if every camera flash added weight to the burden she carried. Those who had followed the story closely saw in her eyes not triumph, but the lingering turmoil of someone who understood the cost of what had just been done. Every move she made was analyzed in real time, each gesture fueling endless interpretation about where she stood and what she felt. Camilla, on the other hand, made no such appearance. Her absence was as calculated as it was conspicuous. While the official line spoke of personal reflection, insiders knew she was using the time to regroup, to craft her own counter-narrative and decide her next move. Her silence became a kind of presence, a question mark hanging over every news report. Would she fade quietly into the background, or would she emerge with her own version of events that could ignite an even greater storm? Even political figures, usually hesitant to wade into royal matters, began to weigh in. Some spoke cautiously about stability, urging unity in a time of division. Others, more bold, hinted that such a public rupture could weaken the monarchy's influence at home and abroad. The entire institution was under scrutiny in a way it had not been in decades, and the stakes had never felt higher. Yet for all the headlines and speculation, the most telling moment would come in the final confrontation between Charles and Camilla. Behind closed doors, without cameras or witnesses, Charles and Camilla faced the reality neither had wanted to imagine, and the monarchy would never be the same. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that swallows words before they're spoken. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another, each searching for the version of the other they had once known, before politics, power, and betrayal had turned love into a battlefield. Charles felt the weight of the crown pressing harder than ever, not in gold and jewels, but in the impossible choice between the woman he had shared his life with and the duty he had sworn to uphold. Camilla broke the silence first. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, a reminder that even the strongest walls can crack. She spoke not as a queen defending her title, but as a woman fighting for the place she believed she had earned. She reminded him of their history, of the storms they had weathered together, of the years she had stood by his side when so many others had doubted him. This was her final plea, not for sympathy, but for recognition. She insisted that removing her from the royal line would not only erase her legacy, but fracture the image of the monarchy beyond repair. Charles listened, every word cutting deeper. Yet his resolve did not waver. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, imagining the ways he might soften the blow, the careful phrases that could shield them both from the full sting of the truth. But now, face to face, the language of diplomacy seemed hollow. What mattered was the reality the choice had been made, and it was irreversible. His voice was quiet but unyielding as he reaffirmed his decision, each syllable falling like the toll of a bell that signaled the end of an era. For Camilla, the moment landed like a final door closing. There was no further argument to make, no strategy left to employ. She stood slowly, her dignity intact, even as her position crumbled beneath her. Without ceremony or escort, she walked the familiar corridors for what she knew would be the last time in her official role. Every step was a silent farewell to the life she had fought so fiercely to hold on to. From a distance, Catherine watched. She had not sought this position, yet she had been unavoidably drawn into its center. Her expression was unreadable to those who didn't know her, but to the few who did, it was clear this was not triumph. It was relief tempered by a deep, aching sorrow for what had been lost and what had been necessary to protect. But as the palace gates closed on one chapter, whispers began about what this meant for the monarchy's future and who might be next. With Camilla gone from the royal line, the stage was set for a new era, But beneath the polished surface, the seeds of the next conflict were already being sown in the shadows. In the public eye, William and Catherine emerged stronger than ever, their image burnished by the perception that they had weathered one of the most turbulent storms in modern royal history. Crowds greeted them with renewed enthusiasm. Headlines painted them as the steady hands guiding the monarchy forward, and their every appearance was met with a level of reverence that spoke to a public longing for stability. Yet inside the palace, there was an unspoken understanding. The cost of this victory was higher than anyone dared admit. Behind closed doors, quiet fears lingered about the precedent Charles had set. If a queen consort could be removed from the royal line after years of service, what did that say about the permanence of any royal role? Whispers began among courtiers and distant relatives, not out of sympathy for Camilla, but out of self-preservation. If titles and positions could be so decisively stripped away, no one was untouchable. The monarchy had always thrived on the illusion of unshakable continuity. But now, that illusion had a visible crack running through it. It didn't take long for rumors to fill the silence left in Camilla's absence. Speculation about new rivalries bubbled beneath the surface. Cousins quietly jockeying for influence, senior members wondering if their standing might shift under the evolving hierarchy, and outsiders hoping to step into the vacuum. The power dynamics were shifting, and in the royal family, a shift in power rarely happened without someone paying the price. For Catherine, the victory felt personal, but also perilous. She was more determined than ever to shield her children from the darker realities of palace politics. She knew too well how quickly affections could sour, how easily alliances could fracture, and how devastating it could be when loyalty was tested. Every decision she and William made now carried the weight of safeguarding not just their own reputations, but the future of their children's place in the royal story. Charles, meanwhile, could not escape his own doubts. In public, he remained resolute, never wavering from the official line that the decision had been necessary for the stability of the crown. But in private, late at night, he wondered if he had chosen the right path. Was this truly an act of preservation? Or had he simply accelerated a fracture that might have healed in time? His reign, already defined by compromise and adjustment, now bore the mark of a choice that would forever divide historians and loyalists alike. And so, the unanswered question lingered over every gilded room and whispered conversation. Had this bold, ruthless act truly secured the monarchy, or had it merely postponed an inevitable reckoning? The sense of unease was impossible to shake. The family's outward unity masked a fragile reality, one that could shatter with the next misstep or betrayal. And so, while one battle ended, another was already waiting beyond the palace walls. A reminder that, in the monarchy, peace is only ever temporary. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.